Yeah, thanks a lot for those warm words, Benedict. I'm very happy to be back at CDTM. I was a student spring 2013, and since then haven't had the chance to be one of the speakers at Inspire&Dine. And yeah, cool to be a first speaker at the first virtual one though. And lots of credit for organizing the conference so far. A very smooth experience to this point. Yeah, maybe one first short announcement. Yesterday it was a pretty big day for us at Forto. We did a big rebranding showing basically the evolution of the company from providing transports for B2B companies over sea, air, and rail freight, and shifting more towards supply chain, now being Forto, standing for forwarding technologies and servicing basically groundbreaking digital supply chain technology, and providing companies with the ability to really regain control of their cargo movements. We built Forto for our people to provide a meaningful place to work and grow. We built Forto for our customers to make shipping easier, and for the world to accelerate global trade. And it's my pleasure over the next 20-25 minutes to provide a short insight and review of the entrepreneurial journey that we went through the last few weeks, more or less the roller coaster, and a little bit of first-hand experience on how we experienced the COVID crisis to this point. Forto to this point is a company with about 300 people, spending their days in 8 different locations. We have offices in Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, and Bremen. We have offices also in China, where about 40 of our employees are based today, in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, in Ningbo. And so we basically were hit with COVID pretty early this year, and thus were maybe a little bit better off to prepare for what was to come. Today I basically want to shed my perspective on handling this crisis, and with almost like any crisis, I think there are 3 key steps that we went through and that I would recommend to any other founder as well. And that is first and foremost making sure that the team is safe and healthy. Second of all, that you ensure that operations remain reliable and up and going. And third, that every crisis offers opportunities and you need to be ready to grab them. First, what happened? You can see it briefly in this chart. For us, mid-January, basically the virus started to spread. Wuhan shut down. 2 of our employees didn't get out anymore, and we basically were facing for the first time back then already home office situation. And as you can see in this chart here, as a brief overview, industrial production was going heavily down, and that meant that a lot less cargo was moved. And as you can see here in the chart, this is basically showing weak numbers at the beginning of the year and blank sailing. So means that ships that were supposed to leave the port were canceled due to 2 reasons. The dark red ones are the ones that were basically blanked out due to Chinese New Year, so basically Chinese holidays at the beginning of the year. And the lighter red ones were the ones that were blanked out due to Corona. So for a couple of weeks, basically China was standing still, no cargo movements in and out. You can see it here, textile raw materials. So one of our biggest customers on the air freight side, Bugatti shoes, they didn't get any leather anymore, any material to produce the goods. So pretty much stand still. Electrical equipment, new iPhone release back then was basically announced. Mechanical and electrical parts were getting short, and also a lot of pharma and medical equipment that used to be exported from China was getting shorter and shorter. At the same time, imports to China were heavily decreasing in that time as well. And so mostly here, central processing units, automated data processing stuff. And in the end, that all came together in being a huge ripple effect through global supply chains. Material that was essential to build cars was stuck in China. Material that was essential to service patients in Europe was stuck there. And at the same time, goods that were previously exported to those countries couldn't get out anymore. And 3 to 4 weeks later, by mid or end February, the virus also hit Europe. And all of a sudden, from being in all our offices, we moved into a home office situation. And from one day to the other, we had to shift our gears swiftly, and 280 people, 290 people at that time had to work from home. And at that point, I was really happy that a discussion we had very fiercely at the end of last year, if we should basically buy our employees in China basically old school computers with desktop PC and monitors or laptops. Luckily went into the direction of getting a laptop for everyone, which is a big difference in the logistics industry, because there are still a lot of companies that only have desktop PCs and that use a lot of printers day in and day out. And there were a ton of companies that completely had to shut down during this time and were not able to remain business as usual. So when shifting basically into home office, a few things that we basically thought heavily about was, okay, what kind of tools and technology have to be in place, which I think is a lot easier for startups. I assume most of you use Zoom. I'd say 98% of our competition did not know what Zoom was before and is now basically introducing Skype again, or is changing the digital communication landscape. Also, how can you ensure that everyone has a, let's say, comfortable home office setup? People were allowed to take chairs and also monitors from the office home. And then I'd say stuff that's not super clear, but which we basically started to think about very early on, is how can you ensure some sort of social life and engagement between the employees, and also mental health for the employees. On the social life side, we basically organized meet and mingles, random lunches with people. I met a lot of people in the company that I have not met in person before, and that was quite cool. And at the same time, we measured basically day-by-day performance of the engagement of our employees with Peakon, a engagement management platform that I can highly recommend, by the way. Mental health, we introduced a hotline, a COVID hotline by our HR department that people could call in. And I mean, one short example here, there's a lot of families where mom and dad had to do their full-time jobs in the home office now, but basically no one could take care of the kids anymore. So there were a lot of Zoom calls when like dads and moms had their kids on the lap. And one thing we tried then to assist them is we worked heavily with the Association for Freight Forwarders in Hamburg and Bremen, to encourage them that freight forwarding and logistics is basically a systemic industry. And so a lot of our people were allowed to send their kids into kindergarten again by the start of last week. So that basically eased their life a little bit. And I think was just important to also think about, okay, how do different people in different living situations perceive the situation? And last but not least, and that was of course very, very important, I think you can't over communicate in those times. People are of course afraid of losing their job, are afraid of how long the situation may endure. And so we basically bi-weekly Monday morning kickoffs and Friday all hands, when we specifically also shared our view on COVID, the reactions and measures we need to take, and basically the reactions and measures that our employees will face over the next months to come. And that actually worked out pretty well. Here, maybe a short result of a digital workshop with 12 different people of the engineering and product department, sketching out basically part of the tech roadmap for the next months to come. And here they've been actually not just doing that internally, but also we've done a lot of customer workshops and sales meetings this way online. And yeah, so as one key takeaway, one of the core values of FreightHub, we are moving into home office meant new ways of connecting with each other and working with each other. And that was an important learning, I think, for all of us. Yeah. Next, operations. So how could we ensure that we could basically keep up reliable operations and processes? I think initially we were kind of paranoid about, okay, what would this mean to our customer base? I think end of February, beginning of March, it was very difficult to foresee how big will the impact be on retail? How big will the impact be on customers that are importing wooden floor planes or steel? Yeah? And so we were very cautious in the way how we handled our cash. Most of our investors were basically telling us very directly, you need to cut 30% of your workforce, need to save costs, and need to ensure that you have at least 18 months of runway. Otherwise, you won't be able to navigate through the stormy seas that are about to come. And of course, we've been very diligently going into our business plan, managing our cash, seeing how we can navigate the situation, and then decided basically mid-March to do a more moderate step and basically go into 75% short-time work, meaning that basically people work 25% less, and the salary gap is to some part compensated by the government, giving us the required flexibility to basically be prepared for a demand decrease that we strongly forecasted at that point of time. That means we all had to adapt to new times. We needed to ensure that global operations were up and running, and that by now, when there are shortened work days in Germany, people from China can still smoothly communicate with the team here in Germany. And that last but not least, we were really just focusing on the most important tasks, so we could finish it within the new set of resources that we were given. That means for us, again, in the sense of we are proactively and transparently communicating what may happen to the company, and that our first and foremost goal is to keep everyone on board, and that we will do anything and everything that is required to do so, and that this may be a time where we basically need to stick stronger together, and where there may be 1 or 2 or maybe 3 months rougher than usually or than before. But in the end, we're not doing that just for us, but also for our colleagues. And I think that Germany here offers excellent programs. If we'd be in the US, most likely we probably would have had to lay off some of our staff. And that's how a lot of people are not just doing it in the US, but also in Europe already. And that's just, very, very sad to see. So I think it's our responsibility and obligation also, while using those programs, to make the best out of it and to make sure that we can keep everyone on board. And that also meant within this that we were reshifting resources. People out of the HR department were onboarded onto operations jobs, all of a sudden handling shipments, and making sure that everyone got a solid understanding of the situation, that there are basically multiple crises to handle. As a startup, you were not just facing a lower demand due to the coronavirus and the shutdown of retail and people not leaving the house anymore. But at the same time, it also meant the shakedown of the venture capital industry and potential nuclear winter or an ice age where no one knew exactly how long this could take or will take, and a market recovery was not really to foresee. And I think that was important to also openly discuss with the team, and it was cool to see that they were very eagerly supporting our measures in this case. I think in this case specifically, you need to stay solution-oriented, show that, sometimes steps are a little harder, and that in the end, we're doing it not just for us, but once again, for the entire team. Then I think came the phase where we said, okay, now looking at our customer, at our full customer portfolio and requests coming in, we saw that the crises may not just be something that could significantly harm the business, but also something that could significantly lift the business upside. We've been going through a very tough tender season in Q1, so that means like requests for quote processes, bigger clients that ship many thousands of containers, usually basically give them out once a year and look for a new contractor or partner in the beginning of the year. And those are usually the most important and toughest phases for us to win the big guys that basically make our base volume. And end of March, surprisingly, what we didn't expect, a lot of those big guys, like big do-it-yourself retail stores, Obi, Dana, big of the local food chains, Edeka, big e-commerce parties like Zalando or Schaltec, were all of a sudden valuing the benefits of a digital solution even more than before. They're valuing highly and appreciating highly that our operations were still up and running, and that the first test shipments we did with them went flawlessly, whilst other partners had significant problems. And so we overshooted basically our new customer acquisition target in Q1 by about 25%. And looking at those numbers, we could also surprisingly see that some of those businesses and some of those customers we acquired also got a lift up through the Corona crisis. So Hobby, for example, I mean, a lot of people that had to stay home now, German mentality, then fixed their garden or got some new garden furniture or got new plants from Dena. And all of a sudden, the volumes that were initially forecasted there spiked up quite a bit. And at the same time, companies like Edeka, providing a secure food value chain, also had to tackle an increased demand because people were staying at home and basically shopping more for groceries. And so the demand for canned food went up quite a bit. And besides this, of course, establishing a reliable and high quality operation setup for us was a big ability to win new clients that were then also lifted up by the crisis. And on top of this, seeing how the process went in China, seeing how it went from basically being a spike of everyone had to go into home office and a full shutdown of the industry, but then all of a sudden also very quick relief. We thought about, okay, how will this look like in Europe? How can this look like in a Western society? We didn't expect things to relieve as quickly as it did there. I think we can't insist and pull off similar measures. But at the same time, we also thought about, okay, what would it require in order to get people back to work? And then at this point of time, we already had basically a Corona task force with the most important people from operations, from sales, from the HR department to update the team on a regular basis, but also to especially look out for those opportunities. And hence, we basically started in late Q1 already to look for opportunities in the medical equipment space. And I still, sorry, it was a little too much now. And so in the end, basically by end of April, we have shipped more than 14, 15 full planes of medical equipment. By now, more than 40 to 50 million masks that were imported to Europe. Of course, showing our contribution to the current crisis, but at the same time also being a significant chance and opportunity for the business. And I think without preparing for such a situation, for such a case, seeing the development in China, where by mid-February already, our full team was sitting there with face masks and nitrile gloves in order to work there, we would not have been able to spot that opportunity as quickly. And so that in the end meant for us that that Corona overall to this point has been quite a roller coaster with mixed feelings of paranoia, of a high level of uncertainty, but in the end also with a great level of opportunity that still can be leveraged, of supporting companies within their digitalization strategies and showing how relevant it is to really rethink how your value chain and also how your tech setup is currently built up. Yeah, and that's it. So much from my side. That's it so much from Forto, and I'm looking forward to hear your questions and answer them. Thanks a lot.
So thank you very much. First of all, Michael. So guys, that definitely deserves a round of applause. And as an old CDTM guy, Michael obviously knows that on the night of the Inspire&Dine, you might also kind of play with the time limit a little bit. So yeah, he's definitely he knows the processes, but we are really happy. We can give you 2 questions, then we go into the bio break, but yes. I don't want that anyone is sad about not asking all of their questions, because you have so many, which is great. You can also meet him in the digital networking space afterwards, and there you can go and shoot all the questions you have. For now, we have one question that we really wanted to ask from Paula. Michael, you mentioned you use bi-weekly meetings to keep everyone up to date. Increasing meeting frequency to keep everyone connected is quite common right now. But how do you ensure finding the right balance and leaving employees with enough space, time to deeply focus and also have a private life?
So for once, it wasn't really correct. So we basically have 2 meetings a week, not bi-weekly. Yeah, it was wrongly stated by my side. And I think that's maybe not even enough given the pattern of events in those days. I think having 2 meetings a week that take 15 to 20 minutes to update the staff and all the employees during those times shouldn't basically harm anyone's private life too heavily. And I mean, even though we see those meetings as mandatory, not 100% is attending overall. So there's of course also loopholes and possibilities to jump out if there's really urgent family matters, for example.
Sweet. And another question that is coming from Moritz. Do you think that this crisis is a killer or a chance for for logistics startups and innovation, as the industry is kind of rather reluctant to change? What's your opinion on that?
I think it definitely depends on the stage. I think it's the length of the crisis will depend to what extent it will become a significant threat to especially smaller startups that will have a harder time raising funds. And because I think there a lot of VCs are a little bit more prudent at the very moment, but maybe Uwe can answer that later on. Yeah? I mean, we have an expert in the field today as well. And on top of this, I think it could be a great acceleration for the logistics and transport industry. I mean, all the transport and logistics startups I know currently rather see an uplift in the revenues, rather see an uplift in their traction and also in the customer demand. Because I think that if I think about a lot of partners that we are working and dealing with today, it's really a disaster. I mean, just before I went onto this conference here, I got 2 calls, one from Moscow, one from Beijing. We have a charter plane coming in about 2.5 hours, and both of the guys asked me if there's someone doing the ground handling, unpacking the airplane when it arrives. Yeah, and that's just an issue that arises if you have paper-based processes. Yeah, all of them are basically sent into home office now. Yeah. And there's less communication, no digital workflows. And now, like in 2.5 hours, this airplane will land in Frankfurt and we have to organize someone who is unpacking it for short notice. Yeah? And that's a little bit the state of the industry. And I think that a lot of digital startups today can be an acceleration and can be an enabler for digitalization in those spaces and make sure that processes are more reliable, more efficient, and more transparent in the future.
Great. And I think one last question we have, and then we'll leave you go, as I see. So this one is from Max. Does the current crisis affect your view on supply chain risk management? And if so, can you elaborate on how?
Yeah, I think the crisis will definitely lead to a more localized production in the future, I assume, and also a more distributed supply chain. I think a lot of companies, especially in Q1, sense that having a high focus on outsourced production in Asia gives them very little power in a situation like the one that we just experienced. At the same time, this trend won't be as drastic as to where we still see a 50% shift, but maybe a 10 to 15% shift, I assume. I think at the same time, what is even more interesting is redundancy in the supply chain when it comes to partner management. I think a lot of the ripple effects that bigger companies, especially in the automotive and industrial field, experience and will experience in the next few weeks when they ramp up production again, is something that will make them reconsider the way they currently design their sourcing. Because I think a lot of the problems that they will now experience over the next few weeks is having a fully automated, more or less just-in-time production line. If everything is at halt and still managing a parallel acceleration and kickoff again is a very, very difficult and will definitely lead them to quite some challenges in the next few months.